Hi, English 101 students. I wanted to go over the sample paper with you, just like we would if we were in class together. By the time you're watching this video, you should have read the sample paper that I've posted under content and thought about specifically its strengths and weaknesses, marked up the things that that you find important and things like that. So if you haven't already read the paper and thought about what makes it work well, then I'd like you to pause this video and read it first so that the rest of the video makes more sense to you. Okay, so assuming that you've read it, I wanted to first just quickly go over some of the content in the paper. One of the things that I like about this paper is that in the introduction, it gives us some general background about the SRO debate, and it also gives us some information in the second paragraph about what exactly an SRO is. So this student is doing a good job of writing for a general college audience. Another thing that I like about this paper is that the structure is pretty solid. Every single paragraph has a really specific point to it. I have underlined what I think are the topic sentences in the essay. So here in paragraph 2, I actually underlined a couple because it could be either or. SROs should be trained, and here again, SROs are not trained properly at all. And then it transitions into the next paragraph. This is a nice smooth transition. Not only do school resource officers lack proper training, he gives a little shout out to the previous paragraph here, and then he smoothly moves on. But their presence in schools can make minority students feel unsafe. Then he provides plenty of support for that claim in the next paragraph. He brings in some personal experience. Remember that you don't need to do that, but if you feel that you have relevant personal experience that you can share, feel free to use it if you think it's going to support your point effectively. The next paragraph, look at this transition. In addition to being properly trained and causing students to feel out of place, this is a nice lead into his next main point. SROs can also contribute to over-policing. And this paragraph stays very focused on that point of over-policing. Then the last body paragraph is addressing a bunch of naysayers. The idea that we should get rid of SROs from schools is pretty controversial. It's not a very popular position, and the student knew that. So he spent time not just with one objection, but with 3. So notice how what he'll do is he'll introduce the specific concerns of the naysayers, and then he responds. So people might say that SROs are needed because of an active shooter. But he responds with, in this case, a quotation. A second objection he addresses, my opponents might also say, but I'd say, and then a third objection. Another claim my opponents might try to say is, and then he objects to that one, or he responds to that objection. So in this case, he's got a really detailed, developed paragraph with naysayers. The only advice that I would give this student in his naysayer paragraph is try to be more specific, if possible, about who his opponents are. He's a little bit vague here. So whenever it's possible, name specific groups of people or even specific individuals who disagree with you and respond more directly. And then he goes into his conclusion. He reiterates his thesis, and again, his thesis is repeated at the end of the paper, but in a much more specific way, so that the paper ends on a strong note. So to recap, he's got a 6-paragraph essay. Notice how he's kind of sticking with the basic 3 or 5-paragraph essay structure that we've talked about. He's got his thesis. He's got 3 specific reasons for his thesis, and then he adds a naysayer paragraph and then a conclusion. Now, I am definitely not saying that this is the structure that you need to use. You need to determine the best format and structure for the content that you have to deliver. I'm just saying, in this particular case, this structure seems to work effectively for him. And then at the end is his works cited list. So the next thing I want to talk about is how he uses these sources in his paper. Okay, now what I want to do is look at this paper again and pay more attention to the use of sources. Remember, in the long essay, you are asked to use the work of 3 different writers and incorporate them into your essay using smoothly integrated quotations, citing correctly, and including a works cited list. The student has done a good job with those requirements. In this version of the paper, I have highlighted all the quotations in yellow. Every time he uses another writer's words, he's careful to put quotation marks around them so he's not plagiarizing. And he's also careful to give credit to the source either in the lead-in or in a parenthetical citation at the end. So we'll look at examples of that. I've also highlighted some paraphrase in green. Okay, so I want to point out a few things here before we look at the works cited list. First of all, let's look at how he often introduces his quotations. Remember that when your sources look good, you look good. So in this case here, and in this case at the bottom of the page, he is letting us know the credential of the author that he's using. And that lets the reader know why these people are important and why we might want to pay attention to something that they're saying. So notice how this flows really nicely when he's got this lead in into the quotation. Okay. By the way, if we were to look at his works cited list right now, we would find Childress on the works cited list. We would find George on the works cited list. Okay. The squiggly lines are the topic sentences. That's all. Here, let's look at where he is using both paraphrase and quotation in this paragraph. Remember that you don't want to have too many quotations because then your own voice is going to get lost, and we want to hear you, not just a bunch of other people. So he's balancing paraphrase with quotation here so that the quotation doesn't do too much of the work. So in green are the places where he's taking other writers' words and putting them in his own words. And then he's careful, of course, to cite the source. You always give credit to the source of your ideas. Okay, let's look at a couple of technical things that he's doing here with these citations and quotations. So first of all, let's look at quoted in Anderson. I think we went over this very briefly in class before the break. Anderson is the author of the source. Remember Belinda Anderson's article, When School Feels Like Prison. And she is quoting Ward. It's going to be Anderson on the works cited list, not Ward. So this little abbreviation for quoted in tells us that when we go to the works cited list, it should be Anderson, the author, that we look for. It's the same thing down here. Remember how Anderson's article uses Jason Nance's work quite a bit in the first couple of pages. So he's careful to give credit to the scholar, Jason Nance, who did all of this research. Look at that nice credential. It sounds impressive. But then his citation also directs us to Anderson on the works cited list because Nance won't be there. He's not the author. Okay, so use quoted in plus the author's name to let us know if you're quoting something that's inside of another source. And then you might remember that brackets are used when you have to make a minor change inside of a quotation, change a word or two. Okay, here's another example of where he's changed a word, and so he puts it in brackets. And then these ellipses let us know that he left out a word. Otherwise, everything in quotation marks should be accurate. Most of the words will be quotation. Minor changes can be indicated in these ways. He does it again down here too. Notice this is a good example of how he doesn't name the author in the lead-in. So he names the author in parentheses at the end. And that way the reader can go to the works cited list to find out more. Okay, so let's take a look at this works cited list. There are a few things I want to point out about the overall format. If you have your yellow nuts and bolts handout handy, this is on page 7. Now when we do works cited lists, there's a lot of brown M&Ms, a lot of little mundane details to remember. But the most important thing is that we want to give credit to the sources that you used in your essay. We also want readers to be able to find information themselves if they want to. So if somebody's reading your paper and they want to know more about what Radley Belko had to say, your works cited list gives them that information about where they can find it. Okay, so overall, the big details are that every source that's cited in the paper, every author, is listed in alphabetical order with the author's last name first. Notice that there's double spacing. This thing here where the first line goes all the way to the margin, and then the following lines are indented is called hanging indent. It just makes it more reader friendly. So if I want to find Childress, it's really easy for me to see that. That name really stands out there. Okay? And then within each of these citations, the rules are followed. This is where we really get into the brown M&Ms. If you look on pages 8 and 9, well, I guess 7 through 9, you'll find what MLA says about how to format these individual citations and what kind of information is needed. The easy thing for you is that most of your sources are going to look the same in terms of the way that you cite them, because I think all the sources that I've made available to you come from online magazines, online newspapers, or websites, and they all require the same basic format. The author's name, followed by a period, the title of the article in quotation marks, followed by a period, the name of the magazine or a newspaper in italics, the publisher. These elements all have commas after them, the date that it was published. Now, I'm going to tell you a little shortcut you can take. You didn't go to the internet to find these sources. You didn't go find them on the web. I gave them to you. So you don't need to have the URL at the end if you don't want. This student went above and beyond and Googled all these sources to find the URL, and then a period at the end of the citation. Okay? Again, these are brown M&Ms. These aren't nearly as important as the content of the paper, but when you do it right, it really helps a college audience be able to understand more about the kind of sources that you used and find more information later if they need to. So again, the most important thing here is that every single source that the student cites in the paper is listed in the works cited list. That's what you want to see. Okay, at the very end here, I pasted the rubric for the long essay. And if you were to go through this rubric step by step, I think you would probably agree that it meets expectations in all of these categories. Okay. We haven't really talked yet about the weaknesses of the paper. It is not a perfect paper. There are a couple of things that I would have liked the student to do better. And remember that there are lots of ways to write this paper well. So again, I'm definitely not telling you to try to follow his recipe in terms of his message or his content or the sources that he uses. I'm just showing you one approach to writing this paper successfully. I hope it's useful to you. If you have any questions about your own writing or anything that I've said here, anything you see in the sample paper, I'm going to have a discussion forum set up. You can ask there, or you could always shoot me an email. Hope all is well, and I will see you, or at least talk to you, soon.